Picture this, two boys, barely scraping by in a crumbling slum, their hands stained with rust, their dreams dangling by a thread, until a single, desperate promise changes everything. Welcome to Heartfelt Tales, where raw emotion meets unrelenting truth, and today, we're diving into a saga that'll grip your soul and shake your core. I'm your host, peeling back the layers of Two Brothers Rising from Poverty and the Handshake of Success, a story of grit, heartbreak, and a climb so steep it'll leave you breathless. This isn't just a video, it's a 50-minute odyssey packed with twists, failures, and a finale that'll hit you like a freight train. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to the very end to catch every pulse-pounding detail. Miss a second, and you'll miss the whole damn point. So, smash that like button if you're ready for a ride, drop a comment with your wildest guess about how it ends, and subscribe with that bell on, because at Heartfelt Tales, we don't just tell stories, we unearth the human spirit. Let's roll. Act 1, The Slums, a promise forged in hunger. A gritty slum in an unnamed American city, mid-1990s. The air in the slums smelled like rust and regret. It clung to everything, clothes, skin, the cracked walls of the shacks that leaned against each other like tired old men. 12-year-old Jake Carter kicked a dented can down the muddy alley, his sneakers squishing in the muck. The sound echoed faintly, drowned out by the wail of a siren 2 streets over and the shouts of a drunk stumbling out of a makeshift bar. Behind him, his little brother Sam, 10 years old and skinny as a rail, dragged a burlap sack half filled with scrap metal they'd scavenged from the dump. "Keep up, Sammy," Jake called over his shoulder, his voice sharp but not unkind. "We're late already." Sam huffed, his breath fogging in the chilly November air. "This thing's heavy, Jake. Can't we just—" "No," Jake cut him off, turning to face him. "Mama Rose needs every cent we can get. You want to eat tonight or not?" Sam's big brown eyes dropped to the ground, and he nodded, tugging the sack harder. Jake softened for a second, hating how he sounded like one of the hard-faced men who yelled at their kids around here. But he couldn't help it. Somebody had to keep them going, and with Mama Rose pulling double shifts at the diner and the textile mill, that somebody was him. Their home, if you could call it that, was a one-room shack patched together with plywood and tarp. The roof leaked when it rained, and it rained a lot in this forgotten corner of the city. Inside, a single bulb flickered, casting shadows over a mattress they all shared and a hot plate that barely worked. Mama Rose wasn't there when they stumbled in, dropping the sack by the door. She'd left a note scrawled on a napkin, * back late. "Love you boys, * Jake tucked it into his pocket like it was gold. "Think we got enough for a burger?" Sam asked, flopping onto the mattress. His patched-up jacket was 2 sizes too big, a hand-me-down from Jake. Jake dumped the scrap onto a tarp and started sorting, copper wire here, aluminum cans there. "Maybe. If old man Tucker's in a good mood tomorrow." Tucker ran the scrap yard a mile down the road, and he paid pennies on the pound, but it was better than nothing. Jake's hands moved fast, calloused and stained with dirt. He was small for 12, but his shoulders were already broad from hauling junk all day. Sam watched him, chewing his lip. "You ever think about—" "I dunno, something better." "Like what?" Jake snorted, not looking up. "Ain't no fairy tales here, Sammy. We got what we got." "I mean it," Sam pressed, sitting up. "Like a real house. Or a car. Or—" "Dreams don't pay the rent," Jake said, sharper than he meant. He hated shutting Sam down like that, but the kid needed to learn. Hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. Still, when he glanced at Sam's crestfallen face, guilt twisted in his gut. "Maybe one day," he added, softer. "We'll see." The next morning, they hauled the scrap to Tucker's yard, the cold biting through their thin jackets. Tucker was a grizzled guy with a permanent scowl, and he weighed their haul like he was doing them a favor. $8, he grunted, tossing a crumpled wad of bills at Jake. 8? Jake's voice cracked. "That's half what it's worth." Take it or leave it, kid. Tucker spat into the dirt and turned away. Jake clenched his fists, but Sam grabbed his arm. Come on, Jake. It's something. They walked back in silence, the money burning a hole in Jake's pocket. $8 wouldn't cover the week's rent, let alone food. But it was a start. He'd been saving up for weeks, stashing coins and crumpled ones in a tin can under the mattress. $50 so far, enough, he figured, to get Mama Rose a new coat for winter. Hers was threadbare, and she shivered every time she walked to the diner in the dark. The thought of her smiling, warm for once, kept him going. That afternoon, he left Sam with a neighbor, an old lady named Miss Clara who traded babysitting for scraps of gossip, and headed to the thrift store 3 blocks over. The tin can rattled in his backpack, a quiet promise. He was halfway there when trouble found him. 3 older boys stepped out from an alley, their grins sharp as knives. The leader, a wiry kid called Razor, had a scar across his cheek and a reputation for taking what wasn't his. Well, Razor drawled, cracking his knuckles. Little Jake's got something shiny today. Leave me alone, Jake said, stepping back. His heart thudded, but he kept his chin up. Razor laughed, closing the gap. What's in the bag, huh? Christmas come early. Before Jake could run, they were on him. Razor shoved him against a wall, and the others pinned his arms. He fought, kicking, twisting, but they were bigger, stronger. A fist slammed into his stomach, knocking the wind out of him. The backpack hit the ground, and Razor ripped it open, pulling out the tin can. Look at this. Razor crowed, shaking it. The coins jingled like a taunt. Kid's been hoarding. That's mine. Jake gasped, lunging forward. Another punch caught his jaw, and he went down hard, tasting blood. Through blurry eyes, he saw Razor pocket the money and toss the empty can into the gutter. Next time, share, Razor said with a smirk, and then they were gone, their laughter fading into the hum of the slums. Jake lay there for a long minute, the cold seeping into his bones. His face throbbed, his ribs ached, and the tin can stared back at him, dented and useless. $50, weeks of sore muscles and skipped meals, gone in a heartbeat. He wanted to scream, to smash something, but all he could do was drag himself up and stumble home. Sam was waiting when he got back, his eyes widening at the bruises blooming across Jake's face. What happened? He demanded, rushing over. Nothing, Jake muttered, brushing past him. He dropped the empty backpack on the floor and sank onto the mattress, staring at the wall. Jake, you're hurt. Sam's voice cracked. Tell me. It's gone, all right. Jake snapped, his throat tight. The money. All of it. Some punks took it. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms. I was gonna get Mama a coat. Now we got nothing. Sam went quiet, his small hand resting on Jake's shoulder. It's not your fault, he said finally. Yeah, it is, Jake shot back. I should have been faster. Smarter. Something. No, Sam said, firm for once. You're always taking care of us. You can't stop everything. Jake didn't answer, but Sam's words sank in, heavy and warm. He hated how weak he felt, how the slums kept winning no matter how hard he fought. The silence stretched, broken only by the drip of the leaky roof and the distant wail of a train. Later that night, after Mama Rose came home and fussed over Jake's bruises with a damp rag, the boys sat on the mattress, a single blanket draped over their shoulders. She'd gone to sleep on a chair by the hot plate, too tired to argue about taking the bed. Jake stared at the flickering bulb, his jaw tight. We can't stay like this, he said suddenly, voice low. This place, it's gonna kill us. Mama's killing herself working, and I can't even keep $50 safe. Sam looked at him, eyes wide. What do we do? We get out, Jake said, turning to him. Not tomorrow, not next week, but someday. We're gonna make it, Sammy. No more scrapping for pennies, no more getting jumped. We'll get a real house, food every day, everything. How? Sam whispered, but there was hope in his voice, not doubt. I don't know yet, Jake admitted. But we'll figure it out. Together. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the napkin Mama Rose had left, the one with her shaky "Love you boys." For her. And for us. Sam nodded, solemn as a soldier. Then he scrambled off the mattress and dug around in the corner, coming back with something clenched in his fist. He opened his hand, a rusty nail, bent and dull, probably from some busted crate they'd hauled. Let's swear on it, Sam said, holding it out. Like knights or something. We won't stop till we're out. Jake took the nail, feeling its weight. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. All right, he said, closing his fingers around it. I swear it, Sammy. We're getting out. This is our oath of iron. I swear too, Sam said, his voice steady. He put his hand over Jake's, and they sat there, two kids in a falling-apart shack, holding on to a promise bigger than the slums could hold. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the tarp walls, but inside, something shifted. It wasn't a plan, not yet, just a spark, stubborn and alive, flickering in the dark. Act 2, The Grind, Dreams Tested by Reality. Late 1990s to early 2000s, an unnamed American city. The years didn't soften the slums, they sharpened them. By the time Jake Carter hit 16, his hands were rough as sandpaper, his shoulders knotted from lugging crates and scrap, and his eyes carried a hardness that didn't belong on a teenager. Sam, 2 years younger, had stretched into a lanky 14-year-old, all elbows and knees, with a quiet intensity that came from too many nights reading scavenged library books by flashlight. The shack they called home hadn't changed much, same leaky roof, same flickering bulb, but the weight on their shoulders had grown heavier. Mama Rose was a ghost of herself now, her cough rattling through the thin walls every morning before she dragged herself to the diner. The textile mill had cut her hours, so she picked up extra shifts washing dishes, coming home with hands red and cracked. Jake watched her fade and felt the clock ticking. He'd kept that rusty nail from their childhood oath tucked in his pocket, a reminder of the promise he wasn't sure he could keep. School's done for me, Jake announced one night, tossing his worn-out sneakers into a corner. They'd been arguing about it for weeks, Sam begging him to stay, Mama Rose too tired to weigh in. You can't quit, Sam shot back, slamming his algebra book shut. He was sprawled on the mattress, pencil tucked behind his ear. You're smart, Jake. Smarter than me, even. Don't matter, Jake said, crossing his arms. Factory's hiring. $12 an hour, night shift. That's real money, enough to keep the lights on and get you through school. Sam's face twisted, his voice rising. I don't want you to do that. We're supposed to get out together. One of us has to carry the load, Jake snapped, louder than he meant. Mama's killing herself, and you're the one with a shot at something better. I'm not letting you waste it hauling junk like me. The words hung in the air, bitter and final. Sam stared at him, eyes wet, then grabbed his book and stormed out to the stoop, slamming the flimsy door. Jake kicked the wall, leaving a dent in the plywood, and sank onto the mattress. He hated fighting Sam, hated the truth in his brother's words. But dreams didn't pay bills, and he'd learned that lesson the hard way. The factory job was a beast. Jake started the next week, clocking in at dusk and stumbling home at dawn, reeking of oil and sweat. The work was brutal, loading steel beams onto trucks, dodging sparks from welders, breathing air thick with dust. His back ached constantly, but the paychecks kept the rent current and put food on the table. Sam stayed in school, acing his classes, and Jake made sure he had pencils, notebooks, whatever he needed. It wasn't much, but it was something. For a while, it worked. Sam stopped arguing, though the tension lingered in his silences. Mama Rose smiled more, even bought Jake a second-hand jacket when winter hit, thick denim, warm enough to cut the chill. "My strong boy," she'd said, ruffling his hair like he was still 12. Jake wore it every day, a shield against the cold and a badge of his sacrifice. But the slums didn't let you win for long. 2 years in, the factory started rumbling with bad news, orders drying up, machines sitting idle. Jake heard the whispers on the floor, layoffs coming. He pushed harder, picking up overtime, ignoring the twinge in his spine that flared with every lift. He told himself they'd squeak by, same as always. Then the axe fell. One gray morning in early 2001, the foreman called them into the break room, 50 workers crammed shoulder to shoulder, the air stale with coffee and dread. "Plants shutting down," he said, voice flat. "Economy's tanking. Last shift's Friday." Jake's stomach dropped. He stood there, fists clenched, as the room erupted in curses and groans. 18 years old, no diploma, and now no job. He walked home in a daze, the $200 in his pocket, his last paycheck, feeling like a pebble against a mountain. Sam was waiting when he got back, hunched over a biology textbook. "You're early," he said, looking up. Then he saw Jake's face. "What's wrong?" "Factory's gone," Jake muttered, tossing the money on the mattress. "That's it. We're screwed." Sam's eyes widened. "What do you mean, gone?" "Shut down. Laid off. Done." Jake paced the tiny room, his voice rising. "Rent's due in a week, Mama's barely making tips, and this," he kicked the cash, sending bills fluttering, "won't even cover half." "We'll figure it out," Sam said, scrambling to pick up the money. "You always do." "Yeah." Jake laughed, harsh and hollow. "Like I figured out keeping that $50. Like I figured out keeping us afloat. I'm out of tricks, Sammy." Sam didn't flinch. "Then I'll get a job too." "We'll." "No." Jake roared, spinning on him. "You're staying in school. That's the deal. I'll handle it." But handling it wasn't easy. The slums didn't offer much, odd jobs here and there, a day unloading trucks or sweeping floors, but nothing steady. Rent day loomed, and the landlord, a greasy guy named Vito, started banging on their door, his threats loud enough to wake the block. Jake scoured the city, desperation gnawing at him, until he landed a gig at the docks. The work was worse than the factory, unloading cargo ships in the dead of night, hauling crates twice his weight, rain or shine. The pay was under the table, $10 an hour if the boss felt generous, but it was cash, and cash meant survival. Jake didn't tell Sam or Mama Rose how bad it was, the splintered hands, the guys who disappeared after accidents, the way his back screamed every time he bent over. He just kept going. One night, it broke him. A crate slipped, wet from the rain, too heavy, and Jake twisted to catch it. Pain exploded down his spine, white-hot and blinding. He hit the ground, gasping, the dock light spinning above him. The crew boss yelled something, but Jake couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. They dragged him to a bench, tossed him a rag for the blood on his lip where he'd bitten it, and told him to walk it off. He didn't walk it off. By morning, he limped home, every step a knife in his back. Sam was asleep, Mama Rose at the diner, and Jake collapsed on the mattress, staring at the ceiling. The $60 in his pocket from the night's work mocked him, barely enough for a doctor, let alone rent. He was supposed to be the strong one, the one who kept them afloat, and now he couldn't even stand straight. Sam found him like that hours later, still awake, face pale and sweaty. "Jake," he cried, dropping his backpack. "What happened?" "Docs," Jake croaked, forcing a grin. "Took a spill. I'm fine." "You're not fine." Sam's voice cracked. "You're hurt bad, look at you." "It's nothing," Jake lied, pushing himself up with a grunt. Pain shot through him, and he nearly blacked out, but he hid it. "We're good, Sammy. Just need a day." Sam didn't buy it. He hovered, fetching water, digging out an old bottle of aspirin they'd found in a dumpster. "You're not going back there," he said, fierce as Jake had ever heard him. "It's killing you." "Gotta," Jake said, swallowing the pills dry. "No factory, no choice. Rent's overdue." "Then I'll—" "No," Jake cut him off, softer this time. "You've got finals coming up. You're getting out of here, remember? That's the plan." Sam's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he sat beside Jake, silent, his hand resting on his brother's arm. The room was quiet except for the drip of the roof and the faint hum of the city outside. A week later, Sam came home with news that hit like a lifeline. "I got a scholarship," he said, holding up a letter, his grin wide. "Community college, half tuition covered. Starts next fall." Jake's chest loosened for the first time in months. "That's my boy," he said, pulling Sam into a rough hug despite the pain flaring in his back. "Told you you're the smart one." "It's not enough, though," Sam admitted, pulling back. "Still gotta pay the rest, books, fees. Maybe I should wait." "No waiting," Jake said, firm. He reached under the mattress, wincing, and pulled out a beat-up cigar box. Inside was his secret stash, $120, saved from dock shifts and odd jobs, every cent a battle. And something else, a scratched-up guitar he'd found in a trash heap 2 years back, fixed up with duct tape and grit. He loved that thing, strummed it late at night when the world was quiet, dreaming of something he couldn't name. "Take it," he said, shoving the box at Sam. "And this," he grabbed the guitar, thrusting it into Sam's hands. "Sell it. Get what you need." "Jake, no," Sam protested, eyes wide. "That's yours. You love it." "Don't need it," Jake lied again, turning away so Sam wouldn't see the crack in his voice. "You're the priority. Go be something." Sam clutched the guitar, tears brimming. "I'll pay you back," he whispered. "I swear." "You already are," Jake said, forcing a smile. "Just don't flunk out, all right?" That night, Jake lay awake, back throbbing, the shack emptier without the guitar's quiet presence. He'd given up more than an instrument, he'd given up a piece of himself, a small rebellion against the grind. But Sam's future was worth it. The oath of iron still burned in his pocket, and he clung to it, telling himself this was how they'd make it, step by painful step. Outside, the rain pounded the tarp, relentless, but inside, a fragile hope flickered, stubborn as ever. Act 3, Diverging Paths, the weight of success and failure mid-2000s to early 2010s, an unnamed American city. Time carved deeper lines into the slums, and it carved deeper lines into Jake Carter. At 22, he looked older, his back still twinged from that night on the docks, his hands were scarred from years of labor, and his jaw was set in a permanent clench. Sam, now 20, had traded his lanky awkwardness for a lean frame, his eyes sharp with focus behind cheap drugstore glasses. The shack they'd grown up in felt smaller every day, a cage they were both desperate to escape, though their paths were splitting like cracks in dry earth. Jake had clawed his way out of the docks after Sam started community college, piecing together a junk hauling business with a borrowed truck and a handshake deal. It wasn't glamorous, picking up rusted appliances, busted furniture, whatever people paid to ditch, but it was his. He called it Carter Hall, scratched the name on the truck's door with a nail, and worked 16-hour days to keep it running. The money trickled in, enough to cover rent and help Sam with tuition, but it was a tightrope walk, and Jake's balance was shaky. Sam, meanwhile, buried himself in books, biology, chemistry, late nights at the college library with coffee-stained notes. He'd landed a part-time job stocking shelves at a grocery store, insisting on pitching in, but Jake waved him off. "Focus on school," he'd say, voice gruff. "I've got this." They saw each other less, Sam crashing at a friend's dorm some nights, Jake out hauling until dawn, but the oath of iron held them together, a thread stretched thin across the miles. Mama Rose was the glue, frail as she was. Her cough had worsened, a wet rasp that shook her thin frame, but she still dragged herself to the diner, refusing to quit. Jake hated seeing her like that, hated the guilt that gnawed at him every time she waved off his worry with a tired smile. "You boys are my pride," she'd say, patting his cheek. "Keep going." The business gave Jake a flicker of hope. By 2006, he'd saved enough to rent a tiny lot near the slums, a patch of gravel where he could store junk and sort it for scrap yards. He hired a guy named Rico, a wiry ex-con with a quick laugh, to help with the heavy loads. For the first time, Jake felt like he was building something, maybe not the real house he'd promised Sam, but a start. He wrote Sam letters on greasy napkins, stuffing them with a few bucks when he could. * business is good. Keep studying. We're getting there. *. Sam wrote back, his handwriting neat and cramped. * aced my finals. Med school next if I can swing it. You're the best, Jake. * The letters were lifelines, proof they were still in it together, even as their worlds drifted apart. Then the bottom dropped out. It started with a client, a slick guy in a suit who promised big money for a warehouse cleanup. $100,000 worth of junk, he'd said, slapping Jake on the back. You haul it, you sell it, we split the profit. Jake saw dollar signs, enough to pay off the truck, get Mama Rose to a doctor, maybe even move them out of the shack. He took a loan against the business, $10,000 from a shady lender named Big Tony, counting on the payout to cover it. The job was a scam. The warehouse was half empty, the junk barely worth $1,000, rusted pipes and rotting wood, nothing the scrapyards wanted. The suit vanished, phone disconnected, leaving Jake with a mountain of debt and a sinking gut. Big Tony didn't care about excuses, interest piled up, and his goons started circling the lot, cracking knuckles and grinning. Jake hid it from Sam, scribbling lies in his next letter, * big job went fine. Money's coming, * he hid it from Mama Rose too, pasting on a smile when she asked how business was. But the cracks showed, late nights pacing the lot, skipping meals to save cash, selling off tools to make payments. Rico stuck around, loyal as hell, but even he couldn't fix this. In 2008, Mama Rose got worse. The cough turned into pneumonia, and one night, she collapsed at the diner, dishes shattering around her. Jake rushed her to the ER, his hands shaking as he filled out forms he couldn't afford. The bill came fast, thousands they didn't have, and the doctors sent her home with pills and a shrug. Rest, they said, like that was an option. She died 2 weeks later, quiet and sudden, slipping away on the mattress while Jake was out chasing a job. Sam found her, home from a rare weekend off, and his scream woke the neighbors. Jake got back to chaos, Sam sobbing, Miss Clara from next door praying over Mama's still form, the shack cold and hollow. They buried her in a pauper's grave, a wooden cross marking the spot. Jake stood there, numb, the rusty nail digging into his palm. I should have done more, he said, voice flat. Better doctors, better place, she'd still be here. It's not your fault, Sam whispered, tears streaking his face. She was proud of us. Jake didn't answer. The guilt was a stone in his chest, heavy and unmovable. Sam went back to school the next day, midterms looming, no time to grieve, and Jake went back to the lot, drowning in debt and silence. The business collapsed soon after. Big Tony's goons trashed the truck one night, smashing windows and slashing tires, a warning Jake couldn't ignore. He defaulted on the loan, lost the lot, lost everything. Rico walked away with an apology and a handshake, and Jake was left with nothing but a duffel bag and a bottle of cheap whiskey he'd started nursing too often. He didn't tell Sam. Didn't write, didn't call. Shame burned too hot, his brother was out there chasing med school, and Jake was a failure, a ghost of the kid who'd sworn they'd make it. He moved into a fleabag motel on the edge of the slums, $20 a night, the walls stained with God knows what. Days blurred into weeks, odd jobs when he could get them, drinking when he couldn't. The whiskey dulled the pain in his back and the ache in his soul, but it didn't erase the oath. He'd pull that nail out sometimes, staring at it like it could talk back, then shove it away when it didn't. Sam, meanwhile, climbed higher. He'd transferred to a state university on another scholarship, scraping by with loans and late-night shifts. Med school was in sight, and he threw himself into it, driven by Mama Rose's memory and Jake's sacrifices. He wrote letters Jake never answered, *got into pre-med. Where are you? Call me, *. They piled up at the shack, unopened, until the landlord tossed them with the rest of their junk. By 2011, Sam graduated college, top of his class, and landed a spot in medical school, a grueling dream he'd fought for tooth and nail. He celebrated alone, a cheap beer in a dorm room, wishing Jake were there. He didn't know his brother was 3 miles away, slumped on a motel bed, a half-empty bottle in hand, the TV blaring static to drown out the quiet. Jake hit rock bottom one rainy night. He'd picked up a day's work clearing a flooded lot, $30 cash, and spent half on booze. Stumbling back to the motel, he tripped in a puddle, landing hard on his bad back. Pain seared through him, and he lay there, soaked and shivering, the nail slipping from his pocket into the mud. He stared at it, rain streaking his face, and laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "We're getting out," he muttered, echoing the kid he'd been. What a joke. He dragged himself up, clutching the nail, and staggered inside. The room spun, the bottle called, but something stopped him, Sam's voice, faint in his memory, swearing on that same rusty piece of iron. Jake sank onto the bed, head in his hands, and let the tears come. He'd failed Mama Rose, failed the business, failed the promise. But Sam was still out there, fighting. Maybe that was enough. Across the city, Sam scrubbed for his first surgery rotation, hands steady despite the exhaustion. He didn't know how far Jake had fallen, didn't know the weight his brother carried. But he felt it, the thread between them, frayed but unbroken, pulling him forward. The slums stretched between them, a chasm of loss and silence, but the oath lingered, buried in the dark, waiting for a spark to reignite it. Act 4, Redemption, rebuilding from the ashes mid-2010s to early 2020s, an unnamed American city. The motel room smelled like mildew and despair, a fitting tomb for Jake Carter's broken dreams. At 28, he was a shadow of the kid who'd sworn to escape the slums, his back a knot of old injuries, his eyes bloodshot from too many nights with a bottle, his clothes threadbare and stained. The rusty nail from their childhood oath sat on the chipped nightstand, a cruel relic of promises he'd failed to keep. He'd been holed up in this $20 a night dump for years, scraping by on day labor and drowning the rest in whiskey. The world outside moved on, but Jake was stuck, a prisoner of his own shame. Sam, meanwhile, was carving a different path. At 26, he'd finished medical school, a grueling marathon of sleepless nights and borrowed money, and landed a residency at a city hospital. His hands were steady now, his glasses upgraded to a proper prescription, but his heart carried a quiet ache. Jake's silence had stretched into years, no letters, no calls, just a void where his brother used to be. Sam had tried tracking him down after Mama Rose's death, but the trail went cold at the shack, now boarded up and abandoned. Still, he clung to the oath, a faint hope that Jake was out there, fighting in his own way. The reunion came by chance, a spark in the dark. It was 2015, a rainy spring evening, and Sam was grabbing coffee between shifts when he ran into Rico, Jake's old hauling partner, outside a gas station. Rico looked rougher than Sam remembered, his hair graying, but his grin was the same. "Sam Carter," he said, squinting. "Hell, you grew up." "Rico," Sam said, shaking his hand. "You still with Jake?" Rico's smile faded. "Not for years, man. Last I saw him, he was in a bad way, business tanked, debt collectors on his ass. Heard he's at the Starlight Motel now, off Route 9. Ain't good, Sam." Sam's stomach twisted. He's alive. Far as I know, Rico said, shrugging. But he ain't the Jake you knew. You should check on him. Sam didn't finish his coffee. He called in sick, first time in months, and drove straight to the motel, a crumbling relic on the city's edge. The neon sign flickered, half dead, and the parking lot was a mess of potholes and trash. Room 12, Rico had said. Sam knocked, heart pounding, and when the door creaked open, he barely recognized the man inside. Jake stood there, unshaven, hollow-cheeked, a bottle dangling from his hand. His eyes widened, then narrowed. Sam, he rasped, voice rough as gravel. What the hell you doing here? Looking for you, Sam said, stepping in despite the stench. The room was a wreck, stained carpet, a sagging bed, empty bottles scattered like bones. Rico told me. Why didn't you call? Jake turned away, setting the bottle down with a shaky hand. Nothing to say. You're doing good, huh? Doctor now. Resident, Sam corrected, voice tight. And you're a mess. What happened, Jake? Life, Jake muttered, sinking onto the bed. Business went under. Lost everything. Didn't want you seeing this. Sam knelt in front of him, grabbing his shoulders. You think I care about that? You're my brother. We swore we'd get out together, remember the oath. Jake's hand drifted to the nail on the nightstand, fingers brushing it. Yeah, he said, bitter. Look how that turned out. It's not over, Sam said, fierce. You saved me, dropped out, sold that guitar, kept me going. I'm not letting you rot here. Jake laughed, a dry, broken sound. Too late, Sammy. I'm done. No, you're not, Sam snapped, pulling him up. Get your stuff. You're coming with me. Jake resisted, but Sam was stronger now, years of hauling textbooks and hospital trays had built him up. He dragged Jake to his beat-up sedan, shoved him in the passenger seat, and drove to his tiny apartment near the hospital. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with thrift store furniture, but it was clean, warm, a world away from the motel. The first weeks were rough. Jake crashed on the couch, detoxing from the booze with sweats and shakes, Sam forcing water and soup down his throat between shifts. They fought, Jake yelling about being a burden, Sam yelling back that he'd never give up. But slowly, the fog lifted. Jake's hand steadied, his eyes cleared, and one night, he picked up the nail from Sam's coffee table, turning it over. I let you down, he said, voice low. Mama too. You didn't, Sam said, sitting beside him. You carried us when I couldn't. Now it's my turn. Sam had a plan. He'd saved a few grand from his residency stipend, meager, but enough to seed something. Start over, he told Jake. Hauling again, but smarter this time. I'll back you. Jake hesitated, shame warring with hope. I screwed it up before. What if? You won't, Sam cut in. We're doing this together. By 2016, they launched Carter Hall 2.0. Sam chipped in $3,000 for a used pickup and a stack of flyers. Jake hit the streets, pitching to small businesses and homeowners. He'd learned from the scam, checked references, stuck to cash up-front jobs, kept it lean. The first year was slow, barely breaking even, sleeping in the truck some nights, but Jake poured everything into it, his old grit resurfacing. Sam helped when he could, crunching numbers after surgeries, keeping Jake's spirits up with late-night talks over cheap beer. The tide turned in 2018. A recycling plant offered Jake a contract, steady work hauling scrap metal, good money if he could scale up. He bought a second truck, hired Rico back, and started turning a profit. The business grew, slow but sure, and Jake moved out of Sam's place into a rented room, not the shack, not the motel, a step up. He sent Sam a check one day, $500, with a scrawled note, *first payback. More coming, *. Sam framed it, hung it on his wall. Sam's career soared too. By 2020, he finished his residency, landed a job as a trauma surgeon, long hours, blood and chaos, but he thrived. He bought a modest condo, a far cry from the slums, and kept a spare key for Jake. They'd meet when they could, dinners at diners, reminiscing about Mama Rose, laughing over old scars. The distance that had split them shrank, replaced by a bond forged anew. In 2023, they honored Mama Rose's memory. Jake's company was solid now, 5 trucks, a small crew, a reputation for reliability. Sam was a respected doctor, saving lives daily. They pooled their money and funded a free clinic in the slums, a brick building with a sign that read Rose Carter Health Center. The opening day, they stood outside, watching kids play in the lot where their shack once stood. "We did it," Sam said, clapping Jake's shoulder. "Not bad for 2 slum rats." Jake grinned, the first real smile in years. "Yeah. But we're not done." He pulled the rusty nail from his pocket, still there, after all this time. "Promised a house, right? Real one." Sam laughed, pulling an identical nail from his own pocket. "Guess we both kept it. Deal's still on." The clinic was their first victory, a beacon in the dark they'd clawed out of. Jake's back still ached, his hands bore the scars of the grind, but he stood taller now, pride replacing shame. Sam, steady and sure, had grown into the protector Jake once was, their roles reversing yet intertwining. By early 2025, Carter Hall was a name in the city, recycling contracts, steady growth, Jake a quiet success story. Sam's surgeries made headlines, lives saved in the chaos of the ER. They'd rebuilt from the ashes, not alone but together, the oath of iron a thread that never snapped. One night, over takeout in Sam's condo, Jake looked out at the city skyline, lights glittering like stars they'd once dreamed under. "Think Mama's proud?" he asked, voice soft. "She always was," Sam said, meeting his eyes. "But yeah. She'd love this." They clinked beers, a silent toast to the past and the future. The road ahead stretched wide, hard-won, blood-earned, theirs. Act 5, The Handshake, a promise fulfilled March 25, 2025, atop the tallest skyscraper in an unnamed American city. The elevator hummed as it climbed, a smooth ascent that felt like a dream to Jake Carter. At 32, he stood straight despite the faint ache in his back, a reminder of the docks, the factory, the years of breaking himself to build something better. His suit was sharp, charcoal gray, tailored to fit shoulders broadened by labor and resilience. Beside him, Sam, 30, adjusted his tie, a deep blue that matched his steady eyes, his own suit crisp, a surgeon's precision in every line. The elevator doors slid open, and they stepped onto the rooftop of the city's tallest skyscraper, a glass and steel giant that pierced the clouds. The view hit them like a punch. The city sprawled beneath, a jagged tapestry of light stretching to the horizon, highways snaking through concrete, the slums a faint smudge in the distance. A cool March breeze tugged at their jackets, carrying the faint hum of traffic far below. The rooftop bar was quiet, a private corner reserved just for them, a table set with 2 glasses and a bottle of bourbon they'd picked out weeks ago. This was their night, a reunion planned since the clinic opened, a promise kept after decades of struggle. Jake ran a hand through his hair, still thick but streaked with early gray. "Never thought I'd see this," he said, voice low, almost lost in the wind. "Us, up here. Like kings or something." Sam grinned, clapping him on the back. "Kings of the junk heap, maybe. But yeah, it's something." They settled into the chairs, the city glowing like a prize they'd won. Jake poured the bourbon, amber liquid glinting in the soft light strung above, and slid a glass to Sam. "To Mama Rose," he said, raising his. "And to us." "To Mama," Sam echoed, clinking his glass. "And to not screwing it up too bad." They laughed, the sound warm and free, cutting through the years of silence and strain. The bourbon burned going down, a good burn, grounding them in the moment. Below, the slums were a memory, still there, still harsh, but no longer their cage. Carter Hall was a name now, a fleet of 10 trucks, a recycling empire born from grit and second chances. Sam's hands saved lives daily, a trauma surgeon with a reputation for calm under fire. They'd made it, not just out, but up, higher than they'd dared to dream as kids. Jake leaned back, staring at the skyline. "Remember that first $50, he said, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Razor and his punks beating the hell out of me?" Sam chuckled, shaking his head. "You came home looking like a punching bag. I thought you'd never get over it." "Still stings," Jake admitted, rubbing his jaw like he could feel the old bruise. "Weeks of scrapping, gone in 10 seconds. All for Mama's coat." "She'd have loved it, though," Sam said, softer. "Even if you never got it to her." "Yeah," Jake agreed, his eyes distant. "She'd have loved this more, us not starving, not scrambling. Took long enough." They sipped in silence, the past unfurling between them like a map of scars. The factory days, Jake's hands black with oil, his back screaming from the grind. The docks, that night he'd fallen, pain searing through him while Sam slept miles away. The guitar he'd sold, its twang a ghost in his memory, traded for Sam's shot at college. And the business, Carter Hall's first collapse, Mama Rose's death, the motel years when Jake had drowned in whiskey and shame. Every failure a stone in their path, every sacrifice a brick in the tower they stood on now. Sam broke the quiet, reaching into his pocket. "Got something for you," he said, pulling out a rusty nail, bent, dull, identical to the one Jake carried. "Kept it all this time." "Figured you did too." Jake laughed, deep and real, digging into his own jacket. "You bet I did." He held up his own nail, the one from that night in the shack, its edges worn smooth from years in his pocket. "Our oath of iron. Damn near forgot what it looked like new." "Never forgot what it meant," Sam said, rolling his between his fingers. "You think we'd be here without it?" "Nah," Jake said, meeting his eyes. "That promise kept me going when nothing else did. Even when I was at the bottom, thinking you'd made it without me." "Never without you," Sam said, firm. "You carried me, Jake. Dropped out, took the hits, I wouldn't be here if you hadn't." Jake looked away, throat tight. "You pulled me out of that motel. I'd have died there, Sam. Drunk and done. Family doesn't quit," Sam said simply. "You taught me that." The sun was dipping now, painting the sky orange and gold, the city catching fire in its glow. They stood, moving to the edge of the rooftop, the glass railing cool under their hands. The slums were a speck from here, the clinic a faint outline, Rose Carter Health Center, their first real win. Jake thought of Mama Rose's tired smile, her cracked hands ruffling his hair, her voice whispering pride even when they had nothing. She'd never see this, but she was here, in the air between them, in the lives they'd built. "Think we're done?" Sam asked, glancing at him. "House next, right? Like we said." Jake nodded, a slow grin spreading. "Big one. Porch, yard, the works. No more shacks, no more leaks. Gonna need a garage for all those trucks," Sam teased. "And a guest room for me when I crash after shifts." "Deal," Jake said, turning to him. "But you're cooking." "I'm not eating hospital food." They laughed again, the sound carrying over the city, a victory cry for two boys who'd beaten the odds. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching long and thin, and Jake felt it, the weight lifting, the past settling into something he could carry without breaking. He'd been the protector once, the one who took the punches, but Sam had grown into that role too, pulling him back from the edge. Together, they'd climbed higher than the slums could reach. As the last light bled from the sky, Jake held out his hand. "Oath's done, huh? We made it." Sam took it, his grip firm, calluses from surgery meeting Jake's scars from hauling. Not done, he said, eyes glinting. Just starting. They clasped hands, not a quick shake but a hold, strong, steady, tears welling in both their eyes. It wasn't just a greeting, it was every step, every fall, every promise kept. The city hummed below, alive and vast, but up here, it was just them, two brothers from nothing, standing tall, the oath of iron forged into something unbreakable. Jake's voice cracked as he spoke. For Mama. For us. For Mama, Sam echoed, squeezing tighter. For us. They held the handshake a moment longer, the skyline a witness to their triumph, then let go, turning back to the table. Jake poured another round, and they raised their glasses again, the bourbon catching the first stars. The night stretched ahead, full of plans, a house, a legacy, a future they'd earned. Think she's watching? Jake asked, staring at the sky. Yeah, Sam said, smiling. Probably telling us to quit drinking and get to work. Jake chuckled, wiping his eyes. Sounds like her. They sat there, the city at their feet, the past a shadow they'd outrun. The slums had shaped them, hunger, loss, the grind, but they'd shaped something better, a bond no failure could snap, a life no poverty could steal. The handshake lingered in the air, a silent vow that they'd never go back, only forward, together. And there it is, the handshake that shook off the chains of a brutal past, two brothers standing tall where slums once held them down, their oath of iron forged into a legacy that echoes beyond the skyline. This is Heartfelt Tales, where the raw pulse of humanity beats loudest, and tonight, Jake and Sam Carter have left us with a truth that stings as much as it inspires: no fall is final if you've got someone to pull you up. My God, what a journey, 50 minutes of sweat, tears, and triumph, and I'm betting it's still sinking in. Tell me, what hit you hardest? That first stolen $50. Mama Rose's quiet goodbye? Or that rooftop moment when everything clicked? Drop it in the comments, I read every single one, and I want your take. If this story moved you, slam that like button to let us know, and if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button, ring the bell, because Heartfelt Tales is just getting started, more gut-punching stories are coming your way. Until next time, keep chasing the truth, keep feeling the fight. We'll see you in the next one.